city of Beira's central suburbs, many people live in informal urban areas where there is no sewage system and limited access to clean water. Climate change is making conditions for residents worse by increasing the severity of natural disasters. This was the case with Cyclone Idai in 2019, which destroyed over 11,000 homes in Beira and left many poor residents without access to water or sanitation.
Superb. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to this event organised by Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, WSUP, which is the missing piece on climate adaptation, building water and sanitation services for resilient cities. We just saw there some images from some of the cities we work in, and we thought it was useful to show a quick video to give you some of the images of the reality of the difficult types of locations that we operate in. So my name is Neil Jeffrey. I'm the CEO of WSUP, and I will be guiding you through the next hour. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers here today who are going to help us understand how climate change is impacting the ability of cities to provide universal water and sanitation services for all. And they'll also help us delve into some of the solutions that they believe can assist us to advance the universal water and sanitation coverage and also climate adaptation. So it's widely acknowledged today that efforts to reach Sustainable Development Goal 6, which relates to water and sanitation, are lagging behind targets, and universal access is some way off. We believe, as do many actors, that climate change is one of the major reasons why the world is finding it so hard to provide people with something as basic as clean water and sanitation. It's also our belief that water and sanitation should be an integral part of climate adaptation, and that water and sanitation can provide significant value in the advancement of climate adaptation over the next few decades. So the idea of this event is to delve into some of these questions, to understand them a little bit deeper, and to think about some of the practical solutions that can help us find solutions to these questions. So we hope this session will be as interactive as possible. So please do use the chat box to introduce yourself if you want to make any comments or if you want to ask any particular questions. We will, of course, seek to answer as many questions as possible. I'm sure you'll realize that time is limited on these types of events. We have an hour, so we'll try to answer some of those questions in the panel, but if not, we will ask our speakers to write down as many responses as possible. Right, so to get everybody warmed up, we just wanted to get a sense of your understanding of climate change and climate adaptation and how they're connected to water and sanitation. So we're looking for a word, and when I say a word, I mean one word. We're looking for one word from everybody. So could you provide us with a one-word answer to the question, what word would you associate with the challenge of water and climate change? What word would you associate with the challenge of water and climate change? And once you've worked out that word, please go to menti.com, use the code which is here on the screen, sign in and then type in your word. And in a couple of minutes, when we have all the responses, we will share them with you. And it will give us a useful understanding of the broad sense of the audience understanding of these questions. Okay, please go ahead to menti.com. So just to remind you that of the question, so what word would you associate with the challenge of water and climate change? And please use the code, which is on the screen, 71043751 at menti.com. Great. Okay, so the answers are just coming in now. Just give it a few more minutes. I see some of you have cheated and used 2 words, but we'll accept that. Okay, so we can see here clearly scarcity is at the center of this, but resilience comes up strongly. I think that will be of huge interest to various of our speakers that we have later on. And for me, I think it's really fascinating that we've got droughts and floods are 2 of the most prominent words. If you just think about the practical reality of our work and also the practically trying to find solutions to these issues, the world needs to recognize that it will be increasingly seeking to deliver water in situations of too much water and also others of too little. Okay, Elizabeth, can you tell me if the exercise is almost complete? Yeah, okay. Fantastic. Okay, thank you, everybody. That was really helpful. The one other thing I thought that was useful was I saw need for planning and would wholeheartedly agree with the group of people that identified that. So first, to kick off today, we're going to look at 2 examples which will hone down onto the practical reality of the kind of questions that we're talking about. First, we're going to look at Mozambique, and then secondly, we'll have a speaker from Bangladesh. First of all, we will be hearing from our colleague in Mozambique. So Fatima Musa is going to speak. Fatima is the water lead for WSUP in Mozambique. So she will tell us more about the impact of Cyclone Idai. So we saw some of those images in the opening video, but she'll be telling us more about the impact and then how the city has responded to this crisis. So over to you, Fatima.
Thank you, and nice to meet you all. So I'm going to present the impacts of the extreme weather on water and sanitation services. I'm going to turn off the camera to avoid internet cuts. So next slide, please. Thank you. So in this presentation, I will focus on Beira City, one of the cities where WSUP is supporting, which is in Africa, in central Mozambique. Is the 2nd biggest city in Mozambique and has a population of around 600,000 inhabitants, where about 90% of the population lives in informal settlements. So we believe that Beira is under climate change effects since a series of extreme weather events took place in a small period of time. For instance, 3 cyclones have hit the city of Beira in 3 years in a row. In March 2019, so there was the idai cyclone. On the next year, in December 2020, there was the Cyclone, and in 2021 there was the Eloise cyclone. So Beira is one of the world's most vulnerable cities to climate change due to mainly 3 reasons. It's a coastal city located in a low-lying area topography, and some part of the city is even below the mean sea level. It is located in an area highly affected by the tropical storms and has a very rapid population growth. Next slide, please. So in this picture, is shown some of the destructions caused by the Idai cyclone. The peri-urban areas were the most affected. There was a widespread flooding that affected mainly peri-urban areas where low-income communities are found. There was also inundation in latrine areas spread of fecal matters that cause diseases such as cholera and waterborne diseases. There were floods and strong winds that destroyed the house's structures, and a lot of people had to be resettled. The main road to access Beira city has been cut, and Beira was isolated for a couple of days. There was also electricity power supply cuts. It was off for weeks. And the community-based organization offices was destroyed. This is shown one of the community-based organization that works with WSUP in community work, which was destroyed. Next slide, please. So in this map is shown the area flooded in Cyclone Idai. As it can be seen, a large part of Beira was completely underwater. In this red boundaries is shown where WSUP is supporting at the moment. Next slide, please. So there were short-term and long-term impacts on clean water and sanitation. The short-term comprises the water system that wasn't working for a week due to the cut in the electricity supply. So water treatment plants and pumps were not working. So there was no possibility of supplying water. Parts of the water supply system were seriously damaged. A small part of the city, around 10%, is covered by a drainage system, and the sewage and flood water were mixed, resulting in an attempt to public health. Well, WSUP support is more focused on long-term impacts. So there are also long-term impacts that comprises for example, the lack of a disaster response strategy for institutions that are responsible for water and sanitation, vulnerability of the water network, and lack of safe sanitation for around 90% of the population, and the need to solve issues of drainage and solid waste management. Next slide, please. So in this picture is shown WSUP support to the city of Beira after Cyclone Idai. On the first image is shown the construction of a network, water supply network more resilient to climate change. For instance, the standards used in this construction were a bit different from the usual standards, such as the compaction rate of the ditches was higher to make sure that it is resilient to floods. On the second image is shown the rehabilitation and expansion of the water supply system. So WSUP supported in rehabilitation and expansion of some water supply systems, since part of the water supply system was damaged during the flood. On the third image is shown a resettlement camp where WSUP supported in the construction of a small water supply network with some fountains for this resettled community. Next slide, please. So WSUP also supported Beira in the sanitation sector, supported the Beira Sanitation Authority to prepare a sanitation service improvement plan that includes on-site sanitation services in the planning process, for example, on-site sanitation technologies, fecal sludge management, transfer centers, and fecal sludge treatment plants. But there is still a lot to be done. For example, there is a need for infrastructures, toilets, septic tanks, etc. There is also a need for citywide sanitation services to reduce public health risks when areas are flooded. Also in Beira, a lot of solid waste is deposited in the canals, reducing its capacity. Thus, it's also important to look at this issue of solid waste management. Next slide, please. So when Eloise cyclone came in 2021, there were lessons learned from the previous cyclones, and the city was more prepared. For example, the public companies were better prepared to cope with the impact of the cyclone, so there were no significant water and power cuts. The water utility were using improved construction standards. There were new building constructions after the cyclone, which were more resilient to climate change. Also, the communities in low-income areas were more prepared and more aware, for example, on how to store water and treat the garbage. So the impacts of this cyclone was reduced compared to the previous cyclone due to the knowledge that the people gain and also the support from all over the world. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fatima, for that excellent presentation, helping us understand a little bit about how the city of Beira was impacted by Cyclone Idai and how it has recovered and how it's been able to prepare differently for future severe weather events. Interesting. I think it's interesting to note that the World Bank estimates that by 2050, 1.5 billion people living in cities will potentially be impacted by cyclones and other severe weather events. That compares to an estimate of around 680 million in 2000. So this is becoming a more and more prevalent and a more and more serious issue. So now let's pass straight on to our second speaker, Pritam Saha, who is the M&E coordinator for WSUP in Bangladesh. We all know that Bangladesh is a country that's extremely vulnerable to climate change, and we are now going to learn more about how this is impacting on water and sanitation coverage in the country. Over to you, Pritam.
Yeah, thanks, Nel. Okay, hello and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pritam Kumar Saha, currently working in water and sanitation for Urbanpur in Bangladesh. Welcome you all in my session, Climate Change, a Major Challenge to Urban Water and Sanitation Services, the Bangladesh Perspective. Let us start. Next slide, please. Yeah. I believe all the respected participants in this webinar are aware of climate change and the key global impacts due to the rapid changes in climate. Hence, I'm skipping the global literature and jumping directly in Bangladesh issue. Bangladesh is standing in the front line of climate change, along with many other countries. And if all the calculations are right, by 2050, the country's capital will be underwater, as you can see, with including 1/3 of its total land. I don't know how many of us will make it up to 2050 to match the predictions with reality, but we can now focus on consequences the people living in the coast of Bangladesh are already facing. According to reliable sources, a potential sea level rise up to 1 meter is lurking over our head. The nearby riverbeds are already in rise. As one of the consequences, Bangladesh is facing more frequent and stronger cyclones. Such events damaging our coastal productive lands by 15.6% each year by injecting salinity. Drought in the north and less water in the upstream is fastening the whole process of saline intrusion. Apart from crops, salinity is also damaging the infrastructure in the coast. According to a report, the maintenance cost of the rural roads have been increased to 252% due to increasing salinity. Last year, 3.4% more precipitation took place in non-monsoon season, causing a significant loss to the farmers all over the country. On the other hand, Dhaka hits a record high, 41.2 degrees centigrade this year, which was unimaginable even in 2000. All these events and many more displacing around 700,000 people per year. Among them, 400,000 climate refugees have reported to migrate into Dhaka alone last year, whereas the rest moved to other cities. Next slide, please. Well, here we have tried to understand the journey of a climate refugee from Bangladesh. Events like prolonged floods, or flash flood or frequent cyclones, saline intrusion, extreme temperature. These are snatching people's livelihood and assets who are living in the coastal areas as well as in other parts of the country, like northern part, northeast part. And so, I mean, moreover, the hydrology and biodiversity of those areas are also changing in the if and it's making people's living impossible almost. So poverty, food insecurity, lack of drinkable water, and thousand other factors are making those men, women, and children climate refugees. And yes, they are moving into cities without certain jobs or space for living, and settling in the already overcrowded income settlements, as you can see on the right side of the slide. Yeah, next slide, please. So the people are setting down to the urban low income settlements, but neither the lands are growing nor the services are not the services and facilities. As a result, the urban services are failing constantly. When it comes to urban wash resources, we have seen things changing drastically, more like the pincer movement. The climate change is attacking the urban wash services from both ends, like the man in the middle of the slide. As you can see on the left, increasing population comes with additional demand. This made the wash services more difficult to access for the people from low income settlements. As the migrants are the new users, they often don't understand the etiquette of using communal facilities and follow unhygienic ways. More population demands more land for shelters and kitchen, which generally cause more congested toilets and often the removal of waste bins, as drains are open to throw all the wastes in Dhaka. The LIC people used to have around 60 liter of water per person per day, whereas the people in Dhaka from formal housing uses around 300 liters of water per person per day. Here you can see the difference. In summer, the demand of water rises in the formal housing as well as the LICs. But as a result, as most of the LICs people are using illegal connections or less powered pumps or something. As a result, the people living in the formal housings use more water in the summers, and these people they run out of water. And it's always true that the LICs always have more people in this summer than the last one. On the right side of this slide, you can see how climatic events are making wash resources more vulnerable, even in cities. Flooding is making facilities frequently inaccessible. Last year in Rangpur, thousands of people living in the low-lying areas could not access to their toilets around 10 days due to water logging, which was created due to heavy rain. The pit latrines, mostly used by the LIC dwellers, also get filled faster if the water stayed more, emptying of which involved cost. Events like flash flood and waterlogging due to flood also accelerate the depreciation of the wash structures, which again involve additional costing. Heavy rain causes toilets flood, and in many cases, the excreta and other germs are released along with water, what cause disease, which again involve cost. So you can see the hardship of the people living in the urban areas, in the urban low income settlements, and how the climatic events is making their livelihood difficult each and every day. I mean, more difficult than the last day. Next slide, please. I don't know, it's been probably it's been 5 minutes or six. I'm talking about problems as we have millions of problems and only a few solutions, which truly serve the need. Especially under the circumstance we have figured out. The first need we have identified is sanitation service, which protect communities from health impacts of heavy rain and flooding and ensure better accessibility to toilets. Sweepage such a solution, which is a safe pit emptying service. The service includes safe emptying, safe transportation, and safe disposal of fecal sludge. The model works under a public-private partnership arrangement where city authority appoint private service provider to provide the emptying service to their dwellers. In the entire process, WSUP plays the role of a facilitator, help both the parties to learn about technical, operational, and financial aspects of the service. SWIP is an inclusive service, a model where differential pricing is offered, which enable the financially weak people to access to the service as well. Now you can see few numbers related to SWIP as well in the slide, which are SWIP is currently working in 8 urban areas, which include 3 cities and 5 municipalities, and we have engaged 12 private service providers who till date have served 1.3 million people from all these urban areas, and removed almost 32 million liters of human waste from the containments, which without sweep, using the alternative or traditional methods of emptying, could have been gone to the water bodies or nearby sweet water resources. However, next slide please. Yeah. Uh, there are other two services or two innovations or solutions I would like to mention alongside with sweep. One is the need we have realized that the resilient water services for low-income communities. As we have told earlier, most of the communities in low-income areas are using water illegally or with other arrangements. However, so this is how they are not accessing properly to the water. On the other hand, they are spending many money, or I mean more money on water. So USAP, along with Dhaka WASA, Water and Water Supply and Sewerage Authority, have supported Dhaka WASA to start LIC unit, which actually serve the customers from low-income communities, especially because before LIC unit, the water supply was only available for the people living in formal housing. So with this solution, the I mean um, the water, the people are getting water smartly. They are spending less money according to the usage, and the on the other hand, the non-revenue water has been saved, and has in saved by Dhaka Wasa. The other need I would like to talk about is improved community management of at-risk wash facilities. As we have told earlier, that people are coming to the LICs and don't know how to use the communal facilities, and these things are making things worse for the people who are already living inside. And there are other things, they are all related to wash behaviors, which the migrants are not coped up with. So what we have done, we have developed simple message plates, not very complicated, very simple message plate to and train the people who are oriented, the people who are living existingly living in the low income communities, and created community mobilizers among themselves and install those signage outside of the wash facilities. So what happened now, after even after exiting from those LICs, after 1 year, we have visited the LICs and found that people who are migrating from the rural areas are taking learning or education from those materials, and this is actually making them comfortable and adaptive to use the wash facilities and resources. So that is actually making a difference, because people are more cautiously using the facilities and coping up better with the etiquette of the LICs. Uh, well, next slide, please. So what next? These are all the things we have successfully piloted and scaled up, and right now these things are running and addressing the problem we are facing due to climate change, as well as other disaster and natural events, and due to the rapid expansion of cities. The next, we believe that there are many problem remains, because we might be addressing only a few of them. So we believe in scaling up existing innovations to make government's investment sustainable and climate smart. We can support government and their initiative to make it climate smart. We can conduct more research to innovative climate adaptive technologies and human-centric management solutions like we have talked earlier. And we can pilot alternative technologies like rainwater harvesting or different toilet materials to increase its life cycle to accommodate continuously increasing demand. So yeah, this is it. Thank you everyone for your time and patience. Thank you. Over to you, Neil.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pritam, for that really interesting presentation. Obviously, we heard about some of the challenges, but also some of the solutions of how we respond to climate change. So let's move immediately on to our panel. Time is moving on, but I'd like to explore with the panelists how various of these issues that we have identified are impacting cities and how this solutions related to WASH in cities can be advanced. So speakers, if you could put on your cameras, I would greatly appreciate it. So we have a fantastic set of panelists who I'm going to quickly introduce. So first of all, we have Catherine Bruback, who is Global Director, Programs, Innovation and Impact from the Resilient Cities Network. I should say Catherine is based in Singapore, so it's very late for her, so thank you so much for joining us. Catherine is responsible for the development of Resilient Cities thematic priorities, which are circular economy, climate resilience and equity and recovery. And in this, she oversees the design and delivery of Resilient Cities programs connected to resilient solutions. Then we have Alex McNamara, who is Program Manager, Environmental Sustainability at the National Business Initiative, based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Alex leads on the National Business Initiative's water programs and provides key inputs into their climate change work. He previously worked as a consultant at Camco and has nearly 2 decades of experience on working on issues of climate change, energy, sustainable finance and water. And last but not least, Joop Verhagen, who is Program Lead Water and Urban at the Global Centre on Adaptation based in the Netherlands. Joop is lead on water and adaptation at the Global Centre and is working on programs in Africa and Asia and globally. And previous to being at the Global Centre, Joop was at the World Bank and at IRC International Water Centre. Thank you all for joining us. I greatly appreciate your presence today. So let's delve straight in. So we've heard some really interesting stories about how climate change is impacting Mozambique and Bangladesh. I'd be really interested in your opinion on how you think these issues are affecting cities more broadly, and in particular, the question of urban resilience. Catherine, can I turn to you first? Obviously, you have significant experience in terms of resilience in cities. Can you give us your assessment of this question?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me today. I guess what remains to be said, we have heard a lot, and maybe I can try to capture a little bit from the presentations, from the introduction, and also from the words we have seen in the beginning to talk about how cities think about that and how cities address it. So we have heard extreme weather is going to increase. We see more cyclones, we see more flooding, we see more droughts and so on. So these extreme weather events, cities need to prepare for that, and they are very well aware of that. On the other hand, there is also a lot of shift in cities going on at the moment to when they think about climate change is also they are looking into the future. And while water not necessarily needs to be a disaster like the ones we have seen with houses inundated or no water at all, it is for cities they are grappling with the problem that they don't even know where do we get the water from in the future. So when we are planning infrastructure specifically and we are talking about resilient services is how much water am I going to have in 5 years or 10 years, and where do I get it from, and how many people do I actually have to supply water to, and how do I manage that, and how do I consider that in an environment like Beira or like Nairobi or any other African city or southeastern city where we have large parts of the population who are not even connected to a service and are being provided by water. So I think the important part is that we are dealing with disasters that have very compounding impacts on cities. So flooding is impacting electricity supply. It's impacting people reaching hospitals. So there's a lot of impact which is much further than just inundation in that sense. And cities are grappling with the planning challenges they have. Looking at our network, and we are working with 97 cities around the world on building urban resilience, and that means we are looking at a lot of different shocks and stresses. So climate change, flooding, or drought are just some of them. The interesting part is that the water challenge is something that is really, really pronounced in the network. So more than 80 cities in the network say that either too much water, not enough water, inadequate sanitation, and that relates all to climate change as a stress, meaning like changing the predictions into the future, but also hurricanes, which then lead to storm surges that impact coastlines. So we see that this topic is incredibly important, and cities start thinking about that. I think what is important as well from our perspective when we talk about urban resilience and tackling the water and sanitation services underneath as very critical urban services is that cities are dealing with a lot of issues. So the problem is that these like the mayors and like all the departments, they all feel that they are important. So it's not always the WASH people who are taking decisions, and the mayor every single day decides, is the money going into roads, is it going there, and that is something we need to recognize when we start thinking with cities about what does it mean to build resilient services as well as building urban resilience in total. And that has an impact on the solutions, because at the end of the day, we cannot just only look for a solution that addresses one problem, but we need to look at solutions that address multiple problems. And I think we have seen that very nicely in the presentation. So we have a solid waste problem and a sanitation problem, and we have a flooding problem, and we have a water problem. And how do we actually find solutions? Not only infrastructure solutions, but also how do we design supply concepts? How do we design services in a way that we can maintain services in the case of a disaster, that we can plan services for the uncertainty that we see in the future, and how do we extend services to also address underlying stresses, which are clearly informal settlements, poverty, unemployment, and so on and so forth. And I guess that is somehow what resilience in the context of cities is all about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your initial comments, Catherine. Really interesting. And I think particularly your focus on integrated urban response, looking at multiple issues, how you bring those together is a really important question. So just expanding on that, given your background and your expertise at the Global Centre on Adaptation, could you give us your opinion in terms of building urban resilience, but also then continue to build that concept of an integrated response?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Neil, and thank you for having me here, and also thank for the excellent presentations. I think first of all, it's important to recognize that the world is not on track to meet the SDGs related to water sanitation. According to JMP, there are 3.5 billion people without proper hand washing facilities, and JMP predicts that by 2013, there'll still be 2.8 billion people, for instance, without a proper access to safe sanitation services. So there is a huge issue already, and climate change is going to compound that challenge. Both what Catherine already mentioned, like there are climate shocks, floods, for instance, which mostly will affect the poor. If you, for instance, see that it's mostly poor women and adolescent girls who get affected by latrines, public latrines or community latrines that get flooded. Of course, we all know the story of Cape Town, Day Zero, but it's not just Cape Town. Chennai was really close to it as well. And on top of that, there is also, because of climate change, a huge influx expected of climate refugees or people displaced by climate change. The UN predicts that by 2030, there will be 700 million people on the move because of climate change related issues. And many of these people will actually move into cities. What I think is really important is two things. One is we have to recognize for many of the urban poor, they don't distinguish between what's climate change and what is already a poor service, right? And I think for many cities, it's the same. So sitting here in a room, virtual room, talking about climate change and resilience building, the reality for many people is different. It's just a big issue. And whether it's poor services, whether it's unavailability of water, whether it's further compounded by climate change, for them it's less important. There are real issues that need to be dealt with, and there are real issues that affect the economic development of a city, but also affect the well-being of the citizens living, the urban inhabitants in a city. That's important. And the other thing that's important is that we have to recognize is that water is partly a problem. It's also an enabler. Many of these issues actually need better water management. Giving water to people at the right time with the right quality enables human development, enables economic development. So that's a really important issue as well that we need to recognize. Moving forward, I mean, let me stop there and then let me take further.
Well, wonderful. So self-regulation is an excellent thing. Thanks so much for your comments, Jörg. Right, so really interesting. Our two initial speakers just framed some of the questions there. Alex, turning to you, I wonder if we could focus a little bit more on the solutions. Help us understand your opinion of what action should be taken to protect water and sanitation services, but also to ensure that WASH should be at the center of climate adaptation. I know you have significant experience from Southern Africa, and of course the story of Cape Town hit the global news headlines, but tell us your opinion regarding what solutions are sensible.
Thanks, Neil, and forgive me if I do draw quite a lot on the Cape Town experience, which obviously very much focuses on drought. I mean, I would probably start with most of the things are around getting the fundamentals right, certainly for a city like Cape Town. So the things we all expect, water conservation, changing behavior, the way that places like cities like Cape Town think about water has fundamentally shifted, has fundamentally changed. And that was through good communication and good understanding. Improving the water mix and water reuse and realizing that you have to bring circularity into water. I mean, much of this is known to many of us as well. But I think at the heart of it is also recognizing that you need to have good municipal water businesses in many ways that are operating. So water is often not prioritized. It isn't a visible infrastructure, often in the way we think about roads or housing, for example. So making sure that water is properly priced, that those who can afford to pay for water do pay for it, they cross-subsidize other users, that you have good customer service and billing. I mean, I think building those institutional foundations are going to be the way in which we support the rollout of water infrastructure in other areas of the world. And then, of course, some of the other lessons that Cape Town learned is sometimes you do have to think beyond your own municipal boundary. So it's all very well getting your own house in order and even engaging with your customers, but they've now learned that they have to think about working upstream to, for example, clear alien vegetation that sucks up a lot of water. They've also learned that they have to think about how they can fast track certain projects. They have this, what they call in the new Cape Town water strategy, a sort of adaptation program built into the strategy. Projects that are pre-approved, environmental authorizations are there and ready to be press play on in a much shorter time frame, because obviously it's very difficult to build your way out of a drought. But if you already have projects prepared for a scenario of extensive warming, extensive urbanization that are ready to be accelerated much quicker, you could obviously be more flexible and more versatile. I mean, those are some of the principal things that we learned from Cape Town. There were some other examples from cities like Durban that we've worked with, which have a very different kind of context. They focus more on flood risk. And I think what they've done nicely is work with ICT and technology, the use of drones and the use of just good data software to actually properly manage your dams and manage your water systems. And these are solutions that can be galvanized in the end to support water security and ongoing benefit for communities. One last thing I'd say is that they've done quite a lot of work in the city of Durban in realizing that actually climate change is impacting them with a significant flood risk. It's bringing a whole bunch of solid waste and other waste and basically blocking stormwater systems and culverts, etc. And they've actually turned it around and said, let's not look at this flooding issue as a climate change issue. Let's just look at it as a stormwater management issue. And they've built the internal case within the municipality to say, great, This is actually costing us a lot of money. Flood risk, stormwater damage is costing a lot of money. And the net result of that is the municipality is supporting communities to clear rivers and to improve stormwater management upstream, and basically creating jobs and supporting ecosystems and reducing flood risk for the municipality as well. And I think that kind of model of like adaptation starting to sort of pay for itself for the public sector will also grow in the future. Thanks, Dan.
Great, thank you. I mean, really interesting. You echoed there the importance of integrated urban services, but setting that in the context of planning, but then recognizing how you would connect all that to water resource management and including the role of institutions and business. Yep, I wonder if we can bring you back in, because clearly at the Global Centre on Adaptation, you're focused very much on solutions and accelerating solutions. And can you give us your opinion? Do you agree with Alex in terms of the priorities he identified, or do you bring a different perspective to the question?
I do agree, but I want to bring some other things as well. I think, first of all, it's really important that we have to understand tomorrow's world much better than we do right now. Many cities are still preparing for the disasters of today, or the stresses of today, and I think it's absolutely of vital importance is that we start preparing for a world of tomorrow. And the world of tomorrow has more intense and more frequent extreme weather events. It also has more water stress. I think this is really important. And we talk about building back better, but we have to actually build back stronger a world that, and we have to build back stronger for a world that is significantly different than the one that we know. Having a master plan, if you look around the world, it really helps. Like the city of Beira actually had a master plan developed with support, which attracted significant investments both from the World Bank and the European Development Bank. I think this again is really important. We also need to recognize that, and I think that gets back to the question I mentioned earlier, a lot of issues or a lot of measures that Alex mentioned are actually part of common sense interventions in the water sector, in the water supply sector. Now, at the moment, most of the utilities are tasked with distributing water or treating wastewater, as well as with water resource management. And I think we need to ask ourselves whether that kind of one package of having both housed in one utility is the right one. Should we not have a separate entity working on water distribution or water collection, wastewater collection and treatment, and having a separate entity working on water resources? Because in the end, people are only one of the users of the available water resources, and not the biggest one. 90%, 80 to 90% still goes to agriculture, and we need to recognize that. We also need to recognize that the solutions for a more resilient city, a more water resilient city, are not within the city, they're outside the city. Often it's in the upper catchment, is basically increasing water retention, or increasing water storage that both addresses floods as well as urban droughts. And there are multiple examples of how that's been done, but mostly these are ad hoc examples. Like there's still in many places no solid legal framework that allows utilities to pay farmers for ecosystem services, which are so vital. There is still no framework that allows the reuse of wastewater to be part of basin plans or basin planning. So I think this is really important. So it's preparing for this, for the world of tomorrow, is looking outside the city. And we know that's challenging because the jurisdictions are different. You have to cross the existing administrative boundaries. It's a final thing that I would like to mention is that we need to recognize that many people in the world, across the world, are relying on informal services. And we tend to focus on the formal service providers, water utilities, wastewater utilities. We need to also find ways of addressing the informal services, maybe by recognizing tanker services as a legal way of providing water to people. And within that, I think there are many fairly simple measures, because the capacity of cities across the world is fairly limited. There are many simple measures that could be taken to actually build urban resilience. I'll leave it there, and then I'll be happy to pass on. Back to
Great,
you.
thanks so much. Some really interesting comments there on how we need to advance the regulatory environment and how cities need to connect to their wider the wider environment outside them. So Katrine, coming back to you, you touched on this question earlier, which was that solutions can only move forward if city leaders are willing to prioritize them. And we heard there from the other speakers about how the multiple pressures on cities. But where do you think within the list of priorities of city leaders WASH sits? And what do you think is the barrier or the issue in terms of pushing it up that priority list? And how should we work to try and make that happen?
I think that this question is not so simple to answer because I think mayors and they are also just only people, and they have their preferences, they have their constituencies, and they have their political environment they are sitting in. I think the important part is in the context of climate change and in the context of WASH, and I think for me that was a total eye opener, having worked for 20 years nearly in development aid, is that in 20 years, we did not manage to push access, SDG 6, on the top of the agenda, neither in cities nor in utilities, sometimes not even with the donors. So saying, and we talked about that quickly yesterday. So people are actually, donors are withdrawing from WASH because it's not so sexy anymore to invest into pipes and toilets. And it actually has never been, I guess. So the issue is that I think the important part and what really causes action, and I think what we have seen in the last 1.5 years, and I'm not even talking about the cyclone, I'm talking about the pandemic, is that suddenly everybody talks about toilets, everybody talks about hand washing, everybody talks about water and so on. So what we are seeing, that priorities are shifting when something happens, when people are impacted and when politicians come under pressure. So in Cape Town, that was the case. Cape Town had to face the drought. And I think one point I really wanted to make, what Alex said, the Cape Town drought was not an issue in the informal settlements. Because when and I worked for more than 2 years with Cape Town also during the drought, and we worked on the resilience strategy. The people in the informal settlements, our biggest problem is flooding, and they are sitting in the floodplains. So the drought actually passed nearly by them because nothing changed for them. They still were collecting water at the public standpost. They still got that. They still paid or didn't pay. The drought in Cape Town was an issue of the rich people who were suddenly forced to not flush their toilets. And that is also why it became an issue in the press, because suddenly, like, the big guys did not have water, not the poor guys. And that strongly links to what Joop was saying. So having said that, I think what pushes up a certain topic on top of the agenda is recognizing what are the shocks and stresses I have to face. So if I know there is a cyclone coming, if I know that there is a hurricane season, and that is the conversation we have in our US cities, and I know that they are not the developing countries, but they are preparing every single year that there will be hurricane season, and hurricane season came with the pandemic hand in hand. How are we dealing with that? So recognizing that I have shocks that will impact me, and recognizing that I have underlying stresses like informal settlements, like poverty, like unemployment, like structural racism, a huge issue in Cape Town for resilience building in the context also of water supply, and understanding how I need to find solutions that address that across the board. And I think this is where I moved from being a WASH person, becoming a resilience person. Is my responsibility is not putting WASH on the top of the agenda. My responsibility is to make sure that WASH is a priority. But if I get WASH on the top of the agenda by actually pushing a city through a flood event or a drought event, or seeing that they were not able to provide sustainable services or resilient services because of an earthquake, then I take it. And that means we need to find the right stories and the right incentives to encourage people to make it a priority, and not necessarily by telling them, oh, people are dying because they don't have access to toilets. We are hearing that story for the last 20 years, and it has nothing. It hasn't changed anything. So we need to find the right angle, and we need to find the solutions which leverage resources in the right way to push us forwards to reaching the objective of SDG 6.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Very insightful. Alex, can I give the last word of this panel to you? I just wonder if do you have anything additional to add to that debate in terms of how we push forward these priorities?
Yeah, thanks. I think Jean's made some very good comments. I think a final comment and another angle around, aside from resilience, is what intrigues me is the sanitation economy. If we can look at this in terms of new solutions, and maybe it's my business hat, but essentially commercial opportunities related to biogas, related to chemicals, protein feeds. I don't know. I'm intrigued by where we might go with sanitation access and community improvement linked to these kind of emerging business models that are happening in the global south. And you see them in East Africa, you see them in India, we have in our own country as well. I don't think we should lose that as a possible part of our armor, if I can put it there, or part of our armory. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all three of you, to Catherine, Alex, and Joop. There's so much to say on this topic, such a rich discussion. We could have talked for many hours, but thank you. So I would like to pass on to the final speaker, Lord Boating. Very sorry, we are pushed for time, but you've got 5 minutes just to wrap up the conversation. Lord Boating, of course, is a former cabinet minister, and is currently a member of the House of Lords, and he also sits on the International Relations and Defence Committee of the House of Lords. And I should also say, of course, he is the chairman of WSUP. So, Paul, over to you for your final words, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Neil, and a huge thank you to Fatima, to Pritam, to our panelists, Katrine, Alex, and Joop, and of course to you, Neil, and the whole of the WSUP team. This has been an inspiring session. One that has made very real the challenge that we face in the world today. We live as a global community at the interface between a climate challenge and a public health challenge. And the two cannot be separated one from the other. There is no solution to the one without the other. And our challenge is to bring this issue to the forefront of the minds, not only of politicians and donors, but also and importantly of both the public and the private sector, regulators, all those who have the capacity to make a difference. Because this is about making a difference, and making a difference in a way that not only addresses those issues flung up in that wordgram you had at the beginning: drought, floods, resilience, scarcity, all are there, all need to be addressed, all are part of the story that we have heard of Dakar, which has become the most crowded city of the world, not least because of rural flight into the city and the issues around access to water and sanitation that are a result. Beira, where it's not just a question of if another cyclone like Ida will hit, but when it's going to hit. How are we going to protect the water supply? Will it indeed be able to stop raw sewage flooding entire communities and creating an enormous public health risk? All those things are only issues which can be addressed with a resolve that involves a multidisciplinary approach, that involves the engagement, the active engagement of all the actors. That's what WSUP does. That's WSUP's business. And we have to grow it. And we've got to grow it very much bearing in mind that word that also appeared in that wordgram, inequality. Inequality. Because that's the scandal of what we're seeing in our world today. We need to be clear. The reason why people were concerned about Cape Town, a city which I know and love, lived in for more than 4 years of my recent life, the reality is that the poor in Cape Town have always lived with floods and with drought and with appalling sewage. We only cared because the rich and the middle classes were affected. Otherwise, no one will have cared and no one would have done anything. So our challenge is to build a narrative of mutuality. We are what we are who we are because of the other. That is the Ubuntu That's the Ubuntu principle. We can't be safe in this world in terms of public health. We can't be safe in a world riven by the impact of climate change unless we tackle these issues of infrastructure and access to decent water, decent sanitation. We know what's to be done. WSUP and its partners, you all are part of what's to be done because you're doing it now. Our challenge is to grow it to scale, to get the message over, to mobilize the resources, and to ensure that this issue becomes one for mayors, for city councilmen, for members of parliament, becomes one too of an opportunity for business. Yes, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create jobs. It's an opportunity to make us all safer, richer, and to create a better world. That's the challenge. And thanks to you all, we know what's to be done. WSUP has been doing this, implementing climate adaptation work for what? 15 years or more. It's our entire reason for existence. It's to support cities grappling with urbanization and the increasing fragility of urban life for the poorest of the poor of its residents, and to build that understanding that whether you are rich or poor or somewhere in the middle, you have a communality of interest. And you know, we shouldn't be disheartened by the fact that there's still a job of work to drive this up the agenda. I may be a British politician, I am a British politician, but I was brought up in West Africa, in the Gold Coast, as was Ghana, that is. I remember the first time that we had a flushing toilet. I remember living in a place they called Asylum Down because it was at the bottom of the hill and the asylum was at the top in one of the poorest parts of Accra called Adabraka. I remember my mum being worried about flooding. I loved it. Children love water. But my mum was terrified because she knew what would happen. She knew the dangers. I remember the smell of Isel as she scrubbed the place down after the floods, that pungent smell of antiseptic. And we have a saying amongst the Akan peoples, when you come late to the kitchen, you don't have to break as many pots. And what that means is when you come late to the kitchen, you don't have to break as many pots, is that we've been doing it. We know what needs to be done. The challenge is to scale it up. And I think today's discussion has helped in meeting the challenge, but there's still more to do. And thank you all for all you are doing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul, for those inspiring words and bringing the whole discussion together. Just to say thank you to our panelists, to all the speakers. We really appreciate all the work you are doing, and we want to do more working alongside you. All of us, I'm sure, will be raising the issues of water and sanitation during COP26 at the end of this year. But thank you for all of your contribution. And my final words of thanks should go to Steve and Elizabeth, who organised this entire event. It would have been impossible without you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you have other questions, we hope our speakers will be able to write a written response to you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.